Following OnePlus from their very first phone, the OnePlus One, has been amazing to see the company grow. But there was always two things you could look at when you looked at any OnePlus phone. The phones were great, but the screens weren't that good. The phones were amazing, but I can't trust the cameras. And over the years, OnePlus has worked to correct that. Enter the OnePlus 9 and the OnePlus 9 Pro. Are these the phones that finally make you no longer have to worry about cameras? The phones that bring OnePlus into the camera pantheon of Google, Samsung, and Apple. I want to take a look at the two new OnePlus phones, compare them to the last gen, and then finally answer that question. Do we have the most perfect, well-rounded OnePlus ever? Let's find out. So camera is obviously the bulk of these comparisons, right? Seeing how big or small a jump we've made from one generation to the next. But I do want to begin with the design of these phones, how they look and feel in the hand, because that's always my first visceral reaction to a device when I first take it out of the box was, how does it look and feel? And if you've liked the design of the previous generation OnePlus phones for now the past few years, these are going to feel very familiar. The screen is absolutely gorgeous. We'll talk more about screens when we get there, but the moral for design, if you like the designs of the last gen phones, you will like this. I was hoping though that the matte finish that you could get on the OnePlus 8 Pro would make its way to the 9 Pro, but it didn't. We've got fingerprint magnets galore on the back, but clean them off, they still do look pretty. So while like the design of the phones are relatively similar, the camera is a real different story here for what's been changed from the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro. So and again, like I said in the intro, these have typically been the big Achilles heel with OnePlus phones in the past. The OnePlus 8 Pro was really the first time that perception started to change and you saw cameras become a priority. So I was fully expecting for OnePlus to improve in that area for the 9 and the 9 Pro. It would make sense. And improve they did, but we saw the jump be way more drastic in one of the two phones. So like you can use your eyes. The photos on the OnePlus 9 and the OnePlus 9 Pro are very different. So they partner with Hasselblad and they're using the Hasselblad color science. But the main reason you're seeing the difference is just due to the larger sensor size in the Pro model. This is gonna allow for way higher dynamic range, and just generally you can see it better, more vibrant color reproduction. Now, that is not saying the OnePlus 9 takes bad photos. In a vacuum, just looking at the photos from the OnePlus 9, it is a huge step of improvements from the previous generations, especially with the new Hasselblad color science. I will say that is on par with the photos you got from the 8 Pro, but in some cases actually has outperformed the 8 Pro. But when you compare it to the 9 Pro's photos, whew, that difference is drastic. More than we've ever seen in previous regular versus Pro versions from OnePlus. Both the OnePlus 9 and the 9 Pro also have a new tilt shift feature. If you're not familiar, that kind of makes images appear like they're miniature. It is definitely not a feature everyone's going to use, if ever used it at all. It's something new, and if you're into it, for probably the first couple weeks you got the phone, it's here, and you can see what the photos look like. They do look miniaturized. I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you busy? Fine, but make it quick. I'm shooting. I'm sorry. I just don't want to forget to remind you to tell them that we have a new channel that you're hosting called Money Rush, all about like personal finance and how you can try to make money and make your money work for you without having to have a lot. Videos up there on Tesla, some on Apple, some of the companies that we talk about here. I just thought the people maybe might want to know. I'm sorry. All right, so like check out Money Rush. I guess we'll link to it down below. Is that good enough for you? Yep. Sorry. Oh wait, I wanted to talk to you about your car's warranty. Get out. I'm so sorry about that. So portrait mode was something that I really wanted to test, and my kids are home from spring break, and apparently they did too. And I'm happy to report that both look better than we had on the 8 Pro, which is awesome. But the portrait mode did have a tendency, and this is like a lot of times, to not like fine details like glasses. And as you can see here, they just disappeared. And I'm assuming things like that will be fixed with software. But if you're taking a lot of portrait photos of anybody with glasses, you might want to wait until a software update comes. When glasses were off and using regular portrait mode, without things being cut out, it did do a really nice job. And speaking of improvements, video, and I would just like to give hallelujah hands to really good video from OnePlus. That probably has a lot to do with the Snapdragon 888, but man, this isn't just good video for like OnePlus, but this is like good video in general. The color science here is like leaps and bounds better than last year's 8 Pro. And both the 9 and 9 Pro are capable of capturing 8K up to 30 FPS and 4K in 1080 up to 60 frames per second. The Pro though can record 120 frames per second at both 4K and 1080. The 8 Pro, in case you want to remember, could only record up to 60 frames per second on 4K and 1080p. So big steps there, mostly due to the chipset inside. If you use your phone for video a lot, it is a huge reason to consider the 9 Pro, especially over the 8 Pro, but also the 9 Pro over the 9. I was really impressed with the versatility that I got from the OnePlus 9 Pro. This was, I don't want to understate it, this is really, really good video from a company that has sort of struggled in the past to get video right. They didn't just hit this one out of the park. I mean, they rounded the bases like 4 or 5 times. It is that good and that giant a step from what we've had in the past. So I know I'm raving about the cameras on the OnePlus 9 because I'm so happy to see a company listen and realize where their flaws were and fix it. But it wasn't even what I was most excited about with these phones. It came down to the screen. So all the phones, the 8 Pro, the 9, and the 9 Pro phones, all use 120 Hertz fluid displays. Dynamic is going to adjust your refresh rate, depending on what you were doing with your phones. And I want to give a big clap for high refresh rate. I've talked about them in pretty much every video. I love them, I need them, and I'm so happy when they are there. So they all have that. However, the color reproduction on the 9 and the 9 Pro is amongst the best that I've seen on any phone that I've used. The screens are great, but the 9 Pro model, I think, is taking the display even further. So it's got what OnePlus is calling hypertouch, it's marketing speak. But when turned on, the phone can increase the refresh rate to 360 Hertz. So it's only activated when you play like certain games on your phone, but the increased refresh rate directly translates to way faster touch sampling rates, essentially meaning your phone reacts way faster when you poke your meat stick at it. And this is like tremendously beneficial if you're doing like online competitive games on your phone. And the difference between someone like winning and losing, when it comes down to real millisecond difference in reaction time. So I'm not entirely sure how big a deal this is going to be to majority of OnePlus audience. I get it, it's a really like niche feature. You can only unlock that crazy refresh rate while gaming. But as a self-proclaimed high refresh rate advocate, even just the idea of 360 Hertz refresh rate being possible on an LTPO screen is magic. So as excited as I am with these screens, there is one like weird caveat that I found. So the 9 has 1100 nits of brightness, whereas the 9 Pro has 1300 nits of brightness. Theoretically, plenty of brightness. When I took these phones outside in direct sunlight, I had a really hard time seeing them. If you have them at 50% brightness, you can't see anything. You kick it all the way up to 100%, you can see the screen, but it looks like you've got like a sunglasses on it or like an ND filter. I mean, it makes it really tough to see. Now, not a huge issue. People aren't generally using their phones a lot of times in direct sunlight. Something that you should at least be aware of if you're thinking about picking one of these phones up. And again, a huge step for OnePlus on the screens. And we saw them make huge improvements with the OnePlus 8 and the OnePlus 8 Pro. And they've gotten better here on the 9 and the 9 Pro. Now, comparing the screen on the 8 Pro to the 9, not a huge difference. But comparing the screen on the 8 Pro to the 9 Pro does become more drastic. And again, you're seeing a company realize areas they could improve and make those changes year over year. And I love seeing OnePlus continue to get better at things that they used to have problems with. Performance category is kind of becoming like almost unnecessary, so I'm gonna go through it really fast. Surprise, it's 2021 and it's a OnePlus flagship, day fast. Using Snapdragon 88 in both of them. A big step up, I think, from the OnePlus 8 Pro Snapdragon 865. So RAM is the same as the past couple years. It's 8 and 12 gigs, depending on whether or not you get the 8 or the 8 Pro or the 9 or the 9 Pro, all the same. Pricing obviously varies depending on which model or configuration you get, but we see a bit of a price hike from last year's models, and I think the idea, at least from OnePlus' standpoint, is that the new camera tech is going to justify that price. So batteries are also pretty much identical. Last year's phones, both of them, had a 4510 mAh battery, while this year, I guess technically smaller, at 4500, but nominal difference. I had no issue with batteries here. But speaking of batteries, OnePlus is really getting well known for their insanely fast charging rates. I call it warp charging. So for example, the OnePlus 8T could go from 0 to 100% a little over 30 minutes. It seemed like a magic trick, and you'd figure that would be fast enough, but not if you're OnePlus. They said, no, we can do faster. So we've got Warp Charge Wireless 50T. We can get a full charge on these phones in a ridiculous 43 minutes, but that's not even their fastest version. There's a 65T. You can go from 0 to 100 in 29 minutes. And I'm just gonna let that sink in. I don't know what thermal management wizardry OnePlus is doing, but 29 minutes for a full charge is insanity. So OnePlus has been rocking in-screen fingerprint readers for a while. They go with the optical version. And on the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro, they were higher on the screen than they are on the OnePlus 9. I imagine they were moved for thermal regions. But having the fingerprint reader on the 9 line down to the bottom of the phone did make it harder, at least for me, to kind of get my finger on it. It almost seemed like the sensor was smaller. I thought the optical sensor in the OnePlus 8 Pro was amongst the best fingerprint reader that I had ever used. And then I saw the ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, the ones they worked with Qualcomm to make in Samsung's S21 line, and that took the crown. And now when I'm comparing the latest ultrasonic versus the latest optical, I'm definitely preferential now to the ultrasonic side. The optical version is good, but again, the placement wasn't as accurate to me as what I've gotten used to when I'm using something like the S21s. So if there's ever been an area where OnePlus has just always been good, it's software. This is running the latest version of OxygenOS. It's based on Android 11. It's why a lot of people come over and switch to OnePlus. They've just done an amazing job with OxygenOS. I think in a lot of ways better than stock Android. You get more customization than you get with what Google does with the Pixel side. They give you more options without sort of overwhelming you with things. Their support has been absolutely amazing. It's fast, it's fluid. They do a really good job with backups and transfer. OxygenOS is just really good, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that is the best version of Android on the market. So prior to the 8 Pro, I think it was an objective, I guess, matter of fact that the cameras on OnePlus phones were not amongst the best. And the 8 Pro started to change that narrative a little bit. And now with the OnePlus 9 and 9 Pro, now objectively they are good cameras. The discussion is now subjective. Do you like the color science with Hasselblad? Those are very different discussions to have. And you can pick whether or not you like the way they handle saturation and black levels and that kind of thing. But there's really no denying that these are really good pictures. They might not be your style or taste, but the quality of the image and the quality of the video is so much better than we've had before. That barrier a lot of people had to getting a OnePlus phone has now been removed. And I commend, and I've said this a lot of times in the video, I commend them for fixing it. You don't see manufacturers address those things so quickly, especially 6 months later. So I think it boils down to this. If you've been holding out on getting a OnePlus phone for the camera, that's no longer a worry. If you have a OnePlus 8 Pro and you're thinking about getting the 9, don't. Stick with what you've got. If you've got a OnePlus 8 Pro and you're looking at that OnePlus 9 Pro, especially when it comes to things like video and color science, I actually think it's worth the jump. But the elephant in the room is what's gonna happen 6 months later. Are we going to have the 9T? It's gonna be a perfect combination of both. The rumors of a 9R, if they decide to call it, maybe a Nord version of the OnePlus 9. There's always something new coming from OnePlus, so you never really have the newest thing from them for very long. But what we've got right now with the 9 and the 9 Pro are two really good phones. And generally I have a hard time justifying buying the Pro version of anything. But this year, I think differences are that drastic that I would pick up the 9 Pro over the 9, assuming it fits in your budget, 100 out of 100 times.